Welcome back to the PolicyViz Podcast. I'm your host, John Schwabish. On this week's episode of the show, I welcome my old friend Moritz Stefaner to the show. Moritz is the, I guess you'd say, former co-host of the podcast Data Stories, which is one of the first podcasts dedicated to data visualization. He is a designer, he is a developer, he is a teacher. Moritz was one of the first sort of data visualization professionals that inspired me to get more involved in the field and to try things and to experiment with different forms and shapes, different visualizations. And so we talk about a lot of the different work that Moritz has been doing over the last several months. And in particular, we talk about how he works with and within organizations. We talk about how he sort of navigates between different levels of management, as it were, the hierarchy within different positions within organizations. So if you are working in the field of data or data visualization, and you are working in an organization, as many of us are, and trying to navigate how to sort of balance all the what are sometimes competing opinions or goals, I think this conversation is going to be for you, because it's really interesting to hear how Moritz thinks about approaching these types of projects. So I'm not going to talk anymore. Just going to get you right over to the interview. Here's my conversation with Moritz on this week's episode of the PolicyViz Podcast. Back together again. Moritz, we finally get to see each other. It's been too long. How are you, friend? Good to see you.
It's been a while indeed. Yeah, great to see you, John. I'm doing fine. Still here in my little office here in the countryside in Germany.
German countryside.
Not much has changed. Yeah, I'm going nowhere.
Just kids getting older, more gray hair. Just
exactly.
Yeah.
There you are.
You've been busy. I've seen a lot of your stuff. Excited to talk about it. Let's talk about, maybe we could talk about this podcast project you did, because it's kind of like you can kind of look back and then we can look forward. So
Sure.
So for folks who don't know, you and Enrico Bertini for a long time hosted the Data Stories podcast, and recently you pulled all the transcripts together and built a little tool with it. So do you want to talk about, first, I guess the question is, what inspired, after all this time, what inspired you to finally do that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's true. So we started the podcast in 2012, and I was always like, wow, it's such an archive of great conversations, and also reflective really of how the field has changed and how our thinking has changed. So I got really curious, if we can make that archive more accessible. And we did play with transcriptions, but back in the day we had them done manually. Yeah. So we had to commission them and had to pay for them, and then still had to correct them because there's a lot of peculiar names in DataViz and special concepts like Voronoi maps and so on. So you can't expect people to know how to spell that, right? And so we sort of gave up on it again, but we were always like, oh, it's such a pity, because audio is such a monolithic thing. It's hard to look inside and cross-read it, basically, right? It's difficult with audio. And text you can search and you can reassemble and count words and whatnot. And so, and then there was this big AI wave, and I was like, okay, cool, AI is everywhere. What can we do with it? And one thing was, you can transcribe audio to text now pretty well. There's a bunch of tools you can use. And we used assembly.ai. So it's a special service just for audio transcription. And so, I played with it, and then I was like, oh, this is amazing. And it does chapters, it does speaker recognition, because you also want to know who said what, right?
Yeah.
And it does summarization and whatnot. And
So you popped them all in there.
Yep.
Did you had transcripts during the show though, right? When you were running the show for a while, you had.
Exactly. So first we had manual transcripts, and towards the end we also had automatic transcripts using Whisper, but it wasn't that systematic. And this is the first time we went through the whole archive, transcribed everything, and now we have a full text archive. It's 1.5 million words of data stories. It's a big heap of
1.2 million are Enrico, right?
Actually not. I ran the numbers, and I actually talk a bit more. Yeah, so the stereotypes are not true. So
good to know.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
So And then with this now new database, you built like a front end visualization tool.
Yeah, right. So all the transcription, by the way, was done by Miska Knapek. He's like a database freelancer. So if you have something civil in mind or any like open data project, he's great. And I know he's always looking for commissions. So I can recommend working with him. And yeah, he helped me with that process and ran all the transcriptions and invested a lot of time in fixing the last 5%, which are exactly that arcane, and special names and concepts that you want to get right, because it's a database podcast. So all the domain specific stuff needs to be right. And yeah, lots of manual replacement transcriptions. And yeah, but now we have this big collection of timestamped, speaker annotated text, and we can, let's say you can search for a text. When do we talk about big data or something like this? And then jump to all the audio files immediately, right? Or the audio snippet actually, where it was mentioned. And you can also do like a trend analysis, see like when AI or maps or, or crafting or whatever was mentioned most. So you can really do a bit of archaeology almost on the field.
So when you think back on that, basically decade time span, I mean, a lot of when you look at those trends, a lot of it is built. It comes out of what's happening in the field, but also who you and Enrico wanted, and there was other people I remember at one point, right? Like who you could get on the show, who you wanted to talk with. So like reflecting back, how do you sort of see the show in retrospect?
Yeah. I think that was a great opportunity to think a bit about all that. And so we started in 2012, and I think back then everything was much more open field and much more experimental. I think a lot of people like I were just working on, hey, what are novel ways we can represent data? Can we invent new chart forms or narrative formats, and also this connection between research and practice wasn't that established. So it was kind of unique that I, as a designer and practitioner, would talk to a researcher, and we would realize,
although I will
say the same words, but we don't mean the same things. That's crazy.
I will say that bridge has still not been built. So
yeah, exactly. But and so I think 2012, 13, 14, when we started, this was very much also a golden age of data journalism. And like I think a lot was driven by New York Times, Guardian, Washington Post, who did really amazing new narrative formats, applications, really pushed the field there a lot. And also again the solo practitioners or the small studios who built really good new ways to look at data.
Right.
And then maybe 2015, 16, 17 is maybe more the age of back to analog and crafted data. I think Dear Data came out 2015-ish or so. And I think there was a big wave of going analog, away from the screen, crafting and haptic and texture and also more between the lines and, playing with the rhetorics and all the associations and maybe a bit of an art push.
Right.
Also back at that time, I did the Data Cuisine project a lot, like where we would cook data representations or prepare data dishes, and really stretch the field or the envelope a bit. And then maybe 17, 18, 19 is maybe then sort of the pendulum swings back again. People were more looking at functional aspects. Does this actually work? Can we scale it? What's the ROI? I think things became a bit more utilitarian maybe in these years. And also Dataviz itself got a bit more critical of itself. Like I recall there were a lot of like discussions around, is big data analysis a good idea in general, or what are the limits of what you can do with crunching numbers, and also what are the limits of fact-based communication? Maybe we're not getting through regardless how beautiful we make the charts. Maybe there's still a big gap, and you're never really able to persuade people who don't want to be persuaded and so on. And I think there was a big like maybe first soul searching phase in a sense.
Well, and I think the same thing, not that I'm in this area, but I think the similar thing happened on the academic side too, where it was like,
Yeah.
do we really know what we think we know? Like,
Oh
I think of
yeah,
like a
like
Robert Bashar's
replication
paper.
crisis, also in
Yeah,
psychology, and
right. And like,
like asking a lot of questions suddenly. Yeah, yeah,
right. Like,
exactly.
how do we read a pie chart? Like, nobody
Yeah,
knows. Like,
yeah,
we
yeah,
all
yeah,
think
yeah.
they're
So
terrible, but nobody knows. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think we lost a bit naivete, but also, I mean, that's the only way to really make
Well,
progress, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting over that time span too. It was like at the beginning, the 2012, that first era was like everything was interactive and you could click and hover and everything.
Mm.
And then by the end of that period, it was like, we don't need to make every bar chart like
Yeah.
clickable. Like, let's just make a
Yeah.
graph and just, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, also more devices, more
yeah.
multi-channel, and then people realize, oh, a little square image is actually something that works everywhere,
Right.
and
Yeah.
or a movie, video clip like 30
Yeah.
seconds. People just do it in the subway and so on. So, and I think that all really, came to full effect, like, around these years probably. And
Right.
also, I sort of moved away from more, let's say, experimental and communication focused projects,
Mhm.
more towards tools and like long-term projects and building systems, and like maybe going from artisan more to architect,
Yeah.
to some degree. And also because I thought like, I mean, it's kind of nice that you can always come up with new engaging visuals, but is that all that's there is to it, right? Or how do we create lasting impact or give people actually something they can work with and
Yeah.
do something
Well,
better actually?
I still remember, maybe this was towards the end of the period, you did a piece for Scientific American on the bees, right? And it was like this honeycomb graphic.
Yeah, yeah.
Like this static piece. And I feel like I haven't seen that sort of stuff from you as often over the past 4 or 5 years, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah.
So what was, I guess what was your transition in your work, and what did you transition kind of from that sort of bespoke work
Mm.
into doing now?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think like what I sort of felt maybe I played through to some degree is doing these like single one-off communication pieces, and then I started to think more about how do you create systems, or how do you enable other people also to create good graphics, right? Or how
Yeah.
do you establish a certain culture or a certain language? um, Basically moving from the particular one thing that you craft really well, one level up, and think about, okay, what's a class of things that are
Yeah.
crafted well now. And in a way, it's a trap also, because once you move that level up, you also lose a lot of control, and
Yeah.
a lot of the quality comes from like taking every single thing super serious and thinking
Yeah.
about it, and like, so I sort of, I want to go back to the crafting part as well. On the other hand, I think, well, it's if we really want to have effect at scale and like lasting effect, maybe you also need to think about these larger systems that things are embedded in, or where things happen.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about large organizations and they're just trying to get
Yeah.
right, they're just trying to build their own internal, even just their internal metrics, their own internal KPIs. Like, they just need to get stuff done and out the door. So so you've done a bunch of like big projects. You did a thing with the World Health Organization on like a design language, and you did most recently like this climate conflict index thing. You want to talk about those projects and like what it was, what it was like, sort of building like at scale rather than like a single bespoke project?
Yeah, I think the transition piece there was first that COVID dashboard. So I built together with Studio Nant the official German like COVID vaccination dashboard, and that was really exciting, like to be able to do that. And it was like a one-off piece because we had to build it really quick, because suddenly it was like, oh, we're vaccinating now, we're collecting the
Right.
numbers, we need to show them, and we need to go online in like 3 weeks. But then we also thought about, okay, how can we address everybody in Germany, make sure everybody in Germany understands it, that it's available in all languages, that's fully accessible, it's easily shareable.
Right.
It's presented in a way that's like redundant, like maybe some people prefer text, other people prefer graphics, other people prefer a metaphor, like we had a vaccination clock that would show you how many people are vaccinated per second. Other people want to have the full detailed statistics, otherwise they don't believe you. You know, it was also this time of lots of skepticism and discussions.
Right.
And so we were thinking really hard and discussing a lot about, okay, how do we make this as simple and accessible as possible, right? And so really super solid, straightforward stuff. And through a few detours, this led actually to that WHO data design language project, because at the same time, the World Health Organization was rethinking in a smaller team, okay, how do we actually communicate and store and share data, right? Because they also realized, oh man, it's everybody wants real-time information now on public health, you know, and that just wasn't the case before, right? And so they had to rethink their processes quite a bit. And Core is an agency in the UK, and they brought me on board, and I was able to also then put together a team of freelancers and an agency, 9 Elements in Germany, and a lot of external consultants like John, like you. And so you helped a lot on the design system part, for instance. And so we were able to really get input from great experts and really rethink from the ground up, okay, how should data communication look like, you know, in 2020 something for an organization like this. And so we put a lot of emphasis on really like simple building blocks, transparency, wide accessibility, like really like a Lego system, you know, it's super solid and everything snaps into place, and that's really robust and can withstand in a lot of like, you know, contexts and situations. And
does that, for someone who spent their career like building these super bespoke different kinds of projects, right?
Yeah.
Does that sort of like Lego design process, does that like hurt your heart a little bit, or do you just feel like most people like just need to like they're not building honeycomb plots, right? Like they're just they're doing research or doing data analysis, and they need to get this information out to a public, and that's okay. But does it like hurt you a little bit on the inside?
No, it didn't hurt, because we said this is the way to go, you know, and this was, you know, we knew this is the way to go, and this is how we want to do it. But you're right in the sense that the actual practice of building a system like this is very different than building a cool like data graphic that you just make up, right? Because you really have to think in systems. And so we had all this like design tokens that would define all the colors and font sizes and light mode and dark mode and high contrast mode and so on. And you always have to think in abstractions and within that framework of what you have already. And so it's like a big cathedral, right? You can't just do something like, oh, let's make this orange, but you have to think about, okay, what's the semantic meaning of this thing, and which color, like which abstract color type is it, right? And so will that work? And I think it's cognitively very demanding, and I have high respect for people who do that well, because like you have to concentrate really hard. And the other thing is, you have to be careful that you build a system that's so simple that's still expressive and not limiting, but always creates new opportunities. And it's never a rule book that suffocates you, you know? And I think that's the danger with all systems, is like they grow until they become like heavy and obscure and, you know, like an administration basically. And so you always have to think, it's like gardening, you always have to think about, okay, which part can we prune again, or what could we now combine or name better? So it's a constant gardening activity. And but I think the most humbling part was that we realized, so we've been all had an expert team, great people, all really seasoned database designers, but we had endless discussions how a line chart actually works, you know? So like, I don't know, for instance, you have years, right? Like you have 5 years in a line chart. So you make 5 sections on the horizontal axis, right? But now does the line start in the middle of that first section or at the beginning, right? Or at the end? But either way you do it, you run into trouble and you're like, this can't be true. Like,
Right.
let's see how proper
Yes.
software does it. And then you're like, oh, they all do it slightly different. It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
And they all give you
and then
options to change it. Yeah.
exactly. And then you're like, wow, I had no idea. Like it's humbling in a sense that you really think about the fundamentals of, of how charts
Yeah.
work. And so,
Yeah. How did you on this? I love this. I love this metaphor of the gardening. How did you leave them kind of empowered to or with a plan, I guess, to do that gardening over time?
yeah. So I think I was just watching out for that, like in a sense that I took that role of sort of
Yeah.
pruning also,
Yeah.
and just building the simplest stuff that's absolutely needed. Like, so there's this Yagni principle: you ain't gonna need it. Like, if you come up with something, probably you're not gonna need it. So really,
Yeah.
unless something's absolutely needed, you just don't build it. And so we just had 6 chart types in the beginning or something, and it was vehemently defending those because they were like, but we need stacked bars, and we need a scatter plot, we need this, that.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
you can also do 2 line charts next to each other and then coordinate them, or it's like always looking for easy ways how things can be solved within that simple framework.
Yes.
And the last part was really building everything out with code, so that we had a system where if we were to change a tone of blue in Figma, we were able to save and export and then rebuild, and it would change everywhere. So there is no cost to adjusting things
Right.
afterwards. So we built a smart system there, that would enable that, and that would allow us to really change things as we see the project needs, and I think that worked well. Yeah.
And have you kept like what was the adoption part like? So I can imagine you have this team of people, you've got the core folks at WHO, you've got your team, and then you sort of like release this thing out to, I mean, I don't know how many people work at WHO, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. I don't know, like
lots of teams and across the world and so on. So it's really hard. Yeah, exactly.
So what did you get to talk with them about, like that piece of it?
Yeah, so I'm sort of out of the project by now, so I can't really say exactly how that goes. But the strategy around it was to build first a few individual products that are important also to the organization, and build them in this small team, and then sort of make bigger circles and either build custom solutions for other teams or have them sort of adopted fully. But this process takes a while because, of course, there's like content management system and wider considerations and so on. And so we basically built this core of, these are the principles, these are the building blocks, these are really good examples of how it should work. And there's also the software part of it that's really clean and nicely done. And now they have to sort of run with it.
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, I can't tell you how many groups I've worked with where it's like, I'll be teaching something and I'll say, so do you all have like a style guide or a color palette? And you'll see like one person on this side of the room be nodding, and these people on this side of the room like, no, we don't have anything like that. It's like, because you could build these systems, but if people don't know about them, then they don't really accomplish the goal. So that's a really cool project. But then more recently, I mean, I think like really recently, right? You have this climate conflict index project that just came out.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that one?
Right. So
that's kind of like more core how I think about like Moritz's like work out in the world.
Probably in a sense that it has also that system part to it, but it has a real content, like in a sense that, we have a new data set that is created extra, like specifically for that project. And now it's our role to communicate that and demonstrate how it's used. So, and I think I enjoy that it's, there's a concrete content that we can actually work with. And so, it came out of, the German Foreign Office, they want to understand better how climate change will overlap with, or like hazards from climate change will overlap with violent conflicts and other like pressures on a region, right? So, today, like different regions of the world get these types of stress from all kinds of different factors. And we believe like unforeseen climate disasters can, for instance, like cause migration, which causes then conflicts elsewhere, and they have that on the radar basically, and want to
Yeah.
know what to do about it. And
Right.
so we looked into existing data sources and built like a first quick prototype based on that. But then we realized to make it actually actionable in-house and also for others, it's an open source project. There should be like a harmonized set of data layers that you can just put on top of each other and combine them yourself, and that are all on the same spatial grid, the same time grid, so you can see where have been floods, where have been heat waves, where
Yeah.
have been armed fights, and also how well is the region equipped on a political administrative level to respond to problems, right?
Yeah.
And so they created a whole research project. So we have the PIC, which is the climate or an institute that investigates climate impacts.
Mhm.
And we have the University of the Armed Forces, which are obviously the security experts, and they have researchers now working on that. And we work with them, small team of database experts, to put the data to use in-house, but also explain it to the outside and make it accessible. And so
Yeah.
it has a lot of different facets. So we need to sort of understand how the data side works, how the application side works, do a lot of user-centered design also, talk
So
to
how does that
people, how they use
for
it. Yeah.
you? It sounds like there are a lot of elements in that I would guess you probably don't have like a lot of experience working with like military data, military simulations.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. When you're working on a project, you're doing at least some basic kind of gut checks on the data, right? Like
Right.
this
Yeah.
makes sense. This feels right to me.
Mm.
When you're doing a project like this, where there's so many different data sources from so many different places, where I mean, no individual could be expected to be able to have a gut check on military whatever. Um, how do you think through the data? How do you approach that? Do you just trust the team? Like
Hmm.
what happens for you?
Yeah. So we have a lot this like connecting role between, we have the domain experts and the analysts and the policymakers, in the office,
Yeah.
and desk researchers and whatnot. And they know what they need, right? And they also know what they usually use, and they know what types of formats work in-house.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, they know, okay, often it needs to be printable still, or like easy to circulate,
Yeah.
nothing complicated,
Mm-hmm.
high contrast, static, well annotated.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what we learned is in-house, there is almost like a social media culture in a sense that graphics work really well, maps work really well, and especially annotated graphics and maps, like one slide basically that has a clear message, has a few detailed bullets, and then annotated spots on a map or something. That's
Right.
perfect. And I think that's a lot what people now realize. Oh, that works well in the web, also works in these work contexts, which I
Yeah.
find interesting.
Yeah.
And so we learn about that. And then we have the researchers, and they say, oh, this is actually something we can provide data wise, or we have these different alternatives of how to calculate something. And of course, there's a mismatch between what people say they want and what they actually want. And then there's also a mismatch between what they actually want and what can be done, right? And so
Yeah. Right.
you constantly have to sort of think on your feet and like translate and negotiate a bit between these different layers, or
Yeah.
forces in the project. And I think that's a lot of our role, like this sort of node between these two kind of separate
Yeah.
roles.
Yeah.
And of course, we cannot tell the researchers exactly what to do because they're researchers and they need to have their freedom also.
Yeah.
And we respect that. At the same time, they also want it to be effective and to be used. And so, we sort of try to, just
Yeah.
translate between these
Like
different
translate and
parties.
bridge all
Yeah.
the different skill sets,
Yeah.
and the content areas.
Yeah. And actually, the graphics or like any interactive prototypes we do, they play a huge role there in just enabling that discussion, because you often discuss in theory, oh, it would be great to have a map that shows all the hotspots, the blah blah blah, and then you see it, and then the real discussion starts.
Right.
Oh, actually, that's quite seasonal. Should we do it yearly or should we do it seasonally?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
like, is it actually better to show all the floods, or shouldn't we show them only where actually people live. There's huge floods in
Hmm.
Siberia, but it's not a big damage. Yeah, maybe we should. But then in other contexts, you want to see the raw data, right? Or
Right.
how much do you normalize the data? Or do you show raw values that have a unit, which are easier to
Yeah.
understand? But then maybe sometimes it's better to do something more
Yeah.
elaborate, but then it's just a score between 0 and 1. And so, and all this just happens when you build data representations and have people play with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you feel like those deliberations always end up in a better final product, or have you found in some cases that like you have these deliberations and you end up on this curve where you have to like pull people back?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
because in like my experience of working especially with like researchers and
Mm.
scientists, right? It is um I guess it's even when you're saying, we're building this for a broader public, it's easy for people to lean back into what they're comfortable with. Like, let's
Hmm.
use all of our jargon. This is what I'm interested in, but it's not going to be great for the general public. But
Yeah, yeah.
like, do you find that bend in people's desires, and you have to kind of rein them back in?
Um, yeah, it can go all kinds of ways, of course. So yeah, sometimes you have this faster horses thing. So I want exactly what I'm doing now, but somebody else should do it for me, or it's already done,
Yeah, yeah,
But then people don't even question if what they do is fundamentally the right thing, right?
yeah,
And then it's hard to convince them otherwise if you can't demonstrate a complete solution, that replaces that. And so, of
yeah.
course, there's some inertia there. Um, or as you say, you can just like rabbit, like in a group, you can dig the deepest rabbit holes, of course,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're not careful. But I think to some degree, yeah, you just need good like project management and I think design leadership in a way like that.
Hmm.
So my theory is if a project is driven, I might be biased because I'm a designer, but if you have a strong like design leadership in a project,
Yeah,
it doesn't really happen because then there is a clear vision of
yeah.
which phase you're in and which type of input you're looking for. And if you're expanding possibilities currently, right, or if you're narrowing down, and that's something you
Hmm.
would just announce also like, oh, first we, really go blue sky, open field, and what could we do? And then you say, well,
Right.
now we need to get realistic and pick one of those solutions, actually build it out and test it and
Yeah,
not keep changing things. And I think yeah, if this is well prepared and clearly communicated, then it can work. But it takes a bit of time, and it's not always the same in every group. But
yeah.
yeah, I think that this is where design practice can really bring a lot of value. And I can immediately spot a project where there is no design leadership because it can have exactly these problems. Like it's just
Yeah.
endless like discussions or endless bug fixing, but no actual like new improvements or all these things. So yeah,
Yeah.
wanna hear, yeah, representing
Yeah,
the
no,
side.
so it's funny. So if you were sitting right now in front of a room of, students about to come out into the world with their, they want to be data visualization specialists, I don't know, data visualizers, whatever the term is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
What would you recommend a skill or skills they develop aside from, the technical part of, being, let's just say, a good designer or a good developer? And what I'm thinking here is
yeah.
like the person to person skills that you just mentioned. Like, would you say like uh project management skill, like interpersonal skills, like, writing skills? Like, what would be the skills that you would say like, this is what you really like to do the job? You've already got the design
Hmm.
thing handled, but like to do the actual job, like what
Yeah.
would those other skills be that you think people should have?
It's a great question. So I think the communication part is huge, and people
Yeah,
tend to underestimate that. Yeah, that, and
yeah,
it's never as easy as you just do the work and then the work speaks for itself,
right,
and
right,
often you dream
yeah.
of that. It's like, oh, couldn't I just do the work? And then people say,
Yeah.
oh, it's great, and but then and but if it were like that, you would also miss so much interesting, discussions and learnings and like advances you can get from like first
Yeah.
being irritated and then understanding somebody's position or how people can totally see the same thing totally differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big part. So I think generally it's good if you have some environment where you can quickly produce a lot of different visual data representations. So it can be sketching, it can be code. I'm having so much fun right now with observable plot and observable framework.
Yeah.
I think like Mike and Philippe Riviere, Mike Bostock, they're doing amazing work on the product. And for us, it has been really a game changer in terms of sketching with data real quick. So big shout out here. But it can be anything, it just needs to be one environment where you can quickly load data that's reasonably like large and get a lot of different perspectives on it. Or if you have an idea, quickly be able to demonstrate it. And because working with these concrete artifacts, that's the game changer. And that's the real quality we can bring, because this is often what people who are not data visualizers, who are like more technical or more conceptual, they don't have these artifacts, right? And so conversation stops at some point and you're like, yeah, but then we'll have to see. Or we just decide for one of the options, but we don't actually know how they will play out. And I think we have that gift basically that we can make these things all concrete and spur new conversations. And I think so being able to create these artifacts is the one thing, but then also framing them, presenting them in the right way, thinking about how to present ideas, how to elicit the right type of feedback at the right point in time. I know, John, you've done a lot on presentations as well, right? So it's a lot also this storytelling skill, that about what's the story of our project and where are we in that story, right? And sort of, but also not prescribing that, but also shaping that together and being open there. I think that's sort of key.
Yeah. I wanna finish up. You mentioned a blue sky earlier, and I wanted to ask you what I asked Enrico a few weeks ago. Where's your data viz social media world at these days?
Yeah. So I used to be super active on Twitter, but that has changed. So that has changed, and so I was like, oh yeah, I tried Mastodon for a while, but I'm now pretty optimistic with Blue Sky. It's kind of fun at the moment, at least.
Yeah,
and I also enjoy Instagram. So it's more visual and generally a pretty positive vibe. You wouldn't discuss big things on Instagram, but it's good, good entertainment. Yeah, and you see what everybody's up to. Yeah, but I feel the online community is for me a bit more obscure now. I don't even know where everybody is. So either I'm not part of the cool circles
cool
anymore.
We're the old guys.
Where is everybody? Where is everybody? So it has shrunk a bit, I think, my world in that respect. But on the other hand, then you maybe concentrate more on your work.
Right. So I was going to ask, like,
close-knit circle.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, do you? I go back and forth on this because I miss some of the discussions and the closeness and that, but also like I don't. I've deleted all the apps off my phone. Like I don't.
Right.
And so there's freedom to like read and like do other things, right? Like, so how do you feel? Like, I just wonder how you feel about that. Like the community is more dispersed now, but I mean, it's clearly okay. Like the world is what the world is, but
I think that there's more happening offline, more happening on other channels. It's kind of nice. Also good formats. Like I enjoy a lot of newsletters. It's a good format, and it's also less fragmented. It's more like a traditional, almost like a magazine or newspaper type thing. It's a big thing with little parts and not a lot of chunks flying around. So I think that actually helps with the concentration, the depth. But I sort of miss this sort of marketplace thing, bazaar thing, where you just go in and see what's happening. It's like, woo, oh, these two are fighting, and what's happening over there, and like to have this feeling of there's a community you can always dip into. And I think Data Viz Society is it to some degree, the Slack channel there. But it's also just a very specific, like, wedge of the whole field that's sort of present there. And also, we need more conferences. I think so. I think a lot of the really, really good Data Viz conferences went away because they've been around for a long time. There was COVID and so on. I think all totally understandable, but I think we need a few good replacements now.
I've been missing the conference circuit. It feels like it's down to kind of like outlier from DataViz Society and some of the academic conferences, which are a very different vibe. There's
a few here and there, but I'm also sort of missing that thing, and it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. Like if the DataViz community, will find back together into one thing, or maybe if we really split up in different subgroups, and then maybe again more adjacent to because we're sort of squeezed into into the middle of other fields. Maybe then everybody goes to their other field that they are maybe most at home with. But I think that would be kind of sad. I think DataViz is unique, and also I gave a few talks about what I think is a unique DataViz mindset. Maybe we could link one of them, because there is. I think there is something that unifies us all in terms of how we look at data and what extra value we can bring, and I think we should foster that and stand out
just
around
like
there.
People have one foot in the DataViz community, DataViz world, and another foot in their economics or design or anthropology or astronomy world. Like you can still kind of do both of those. So
but I think we should have, or make sure we have like a good, vibrant DataViz community that meets up regularly, and where lots of
you just need Moritz Conf, just like out on the farm there, and
TEDx my house.
I would love it. Backpacks for everybody.
Maybe camping. If camping is an option, then I could offer. Could offer that.
Well, always good to see you. It's been a long time. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I'll share these projects with folks, and hopefully they'll check them out. And they should definitely check out the Data Stories podcast transcript, because that was a lot of fun to dig in and
search for your favorite words and maybe rediscover some old episodes.
That's right. Thanks, Moritz. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope you will check out all of Moritz's project. I put links in the show notes. If you have any comments or questions about the show, if you have guests you want to see or listen to, please do reach out. You can get me on most of the show's social networks. You can reach out to me on Substack, where I host my newsletter, or you can connect with me directly through the PolicyViz website. So until next time, this has been the PolicyViz podcast. Thanks so much for listening.